Hey everyone, tonight, we're drifting back to ancient Rome. A world of marble and smoke, perfume and power. Where every whisper carried weight, and every smile hid a secret. If you've ever wondered what it truly felt like to live in the shadow of an emperor, not as a senator, not as a general, but as one of his chosen companions, then tonight's journey is for you. So, find your quiet spot. Dim the lights. Let your thoughts loosen a little, like the soft folds of a Roman curtain in the evening wind. And if you enjoy these slow, strange stories from history's darker corners, remember to leave a soft like or subscribe. It helps this sleepless historian keep wandering through time for you. Now, let's begin your life as a concubine of Emperor Nero. You wake to the soft flicker of lamplight. The room around you is pale marble, polished smooth as water. It smells faintly of incense, oil, and something floral that doesn't quite hide the smoke drifting from the city below. Rome hums outside, distant laughter, rolling carts, the low murmur of a world that never really sleeps. You're here because someone chose you. Not for your wit, not for your will, but because one evening at a banquet, the emperor looked across the room, tilted his head, and said, almost lazily, "That one." It wasn't really a compliment. It was a sentence. By dawn, you were taken to the Palatine Hill, the heart of power. A palace complex that glitters like sunlight caught in glass. Guards bow low as you pass. Slaves avoid your eyes. Every step you take feels borrowed. Inside, it's endless corridors of polished stone, painted ceilings, and silence too heavy to be comforting. Here, everything gleams. Everything listens. And somewhere, past a row of golden doors, waits the emperor himself. Nero. A name that sounds like a whisper and a threat all at once. He isn't what you expect. Not the godlike face carved into coins, nor the marble busts with heroic jaws and noble brows. He's softer, rounder. A young man with skin flushed pink and hair the color of dull copper. His curls fall carefully around his temples, too carefully. His lips curve in a smile that doesn't belong to joy, but habit. When he speaks, it's almost childlike. Gentle. Self-satisfied. "You'll do nicely," he says. And just like that, you belong to him. The first days blur together like spilled wine. You are bathed, perfumed, dressed in silk so sheer it almost disappears against your skin. They tell you how to stand, how to look, how to breathe when he enters the room. You are not to speak unless spoken to. You are not to leave unless dismissed. And above all, you are to admire. Because Nero adores admiration. He craves it like air. When he sings, and he always sings, you will listen. When he performs poetry, you will weep on cue. When he declares himself the greatest artist in the empire, you will nod as though the gods themselves applaud from Olympus. You sit beside him during his recitals. Hours and hours of trembling lyre strings and verses about the glory of love, destiny, and, most often, Nero. Senators pretend to swoon. Courtiers clap with enthusiasm bordering on panic. And you, sitting close enough for him to notice, offer the smallest, softest smile you can. It's enough. For now. You learn the rhythm of his moods. The restless energy that follows his performances. The silence that comes after applause fades and reality returns. He hates silence. He fills it with plans, declarations, dreams that hover between genius and delusion. At night, when the palace grows still, he sometimes talks to you, not as emperor, but as a boy who never grew up. He speaks of how no one understands him. How his mother controls him. How Rome would collapse without his art to sustain it. You listen. You murmur comfort. You keep your eyes low, voice soft. Because in this palace, empathy can look a lot like survival. He's married, of course, to Octavia, a quiet girl from a noble line. Her beauty is delicate, her dignity immaculate, her fate sealed. Nero calls her dull, which in Rome means faithful. You see her once, in a corridor, veiled in silk and stillness. Her gaze slides past you, disdain or pity, you can't tell. You realize she's trapped too, only in a higher, lonelier cage. Then there's Agrippina, Nero's mother. A woman made of iron and perfume. She enters the palace like a storm pretending to be a person. Her voice cuts through marble walls. Even Nero goes quiet when she speaks. She doesn't like you. She doesn't like any of his concubines. She thinks they distract him from his duties, from her control. You feel her eyes on you often, cold, assessing, dismissive. One night, she's gone. They say Nero invited her to a feast. They say the ship that carried her home sank. They say she swam to shore. They say she didn't survive the next day. You say nothing. You never say anything. After her death, Nero changes. Something inside him goes quiet in a dangerous way. He drinks more, laughs too loudly, cries without warning. He throws banquets that last for days, where laughter turns to shouting, then to silence again. You stop trying to predict him. His new wife, Poppaea Sabina, enters the picture. She's radiant, calculating, and entirely aware of her power. Nero worships her. You learn to disappear when she's near. Her beauty is edged with danger. And one night, she's gone too, kicked, they say, in a moment of rage. Pregnant. Beloved. Dead. The palace grows quieter after that. Too quiet. Then comes the fire. It starts somewhere near the Circus Maximus, spreads faster than panic can travel. You wake to smoke creeping through open windows. Flames bloom across the city like 1,000 torches lit by careless gods. From the balcony, you watch Nero watching Rome burn. He stands motionless, the light flickering in his hair. They say he sang as the city fell, that he performed a song about Troy's destruction while his own people fled the flames. You don't know if it's true, but you remember the look in his eyes, rapt, almost joyful. When he turns to you, he smiles faintly. This, he says, will be remembered. You know he's right, and that's the worst part. In the months after, the air in Rome feels heavy, full of whispers. He blames others for the fire, new cults, old enemies, anyone who can't fight back. Public executions fill the night sky with another kind of smoke. You stop asking questions. You stop meeting anyone's gaze. You survive by becoming invisible. A silent presence. A shadow in silk. Years pass like the sound of distant waves. New faces replace old ones. Nero grows heavier, paler, and stranger. He still performs, forcing senators to sit through his endless tragedies. No one leaves until he finishes. Some faint. A few die. He calls it divine inspiration. One morning, a servant tells you the emperor is gone. Not dead yet, just fled. The Senate has turned against him. His friends have vanished. His empire, at last, refuses to applaud. When the news of his death comes, his own hand, a whisper of cowardice wrapped in poetry, you're not surprised. You imagine his final words, "What an artist dies in me." Of course. He'd want the last line. You leave Rome quietly. A small villa, olive trees, the faint sound of bees in the afternoon sun. The silence feels strange at first, like a luxury you don't deserve. Sometimes you dream of the palace, the marble floors, the echo of music, the glow of flames reflected in polished stone. You wake and smell smoke that isn't there. You remind yourself, you lived through it. And that, in its own quiet way, is victory. So, close your eyes now. Let the city fade back into history. The empire sleeps. The marble cracks. And somewhere in the ruins, the ghosts of Nero's Rome whisper softly. But none of them can touch you anymore. You survived the Emperor's madness. You outlived his fire. And for tonight, that's enough. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Tonight, we're not leaving the palace, only moving deeper inside it. We're drifting into the echoing marble corridors of Madrid's Alcazar, the palace of the Spanish Habsburgs. The air smells faintly of beeswax and damp velvet. Candles flutter against the tapestries. And tonight, you are the Queen of Spain. Not a radiant, beloved figure, no, nothing so cinematic. You're a Habsburg queen. Which means your beauty is described in letters as pious and your charm as tolerably silent. You were born somewhere in Austria, or maybe Bavaria, it doesn't really matter, because your childhood was a brief tutorial in two things: keeping your back straight, and marrying your cousin. You remember the journey south, the endless procession of carriages, the smell of horses and incense. Every village church along the road rang its bells for you, though most of them had no idea who you were. Just another royal face with the same narrow chin, the same anxious eyes. When you finally reached Spain, the sky seemed lower. The light itself felt darker, filtered through the weight of tradition. And the palace, they called it magnificent, but it was more like a reliquary. Cool stone, shadowed halls, the faint sound of priests shuffling somewhere behind every door. Your husband, the king, was polite, at first. Pale, polite, and strangely quiet. His smile was small and careful, as though even joy might be a sin. He had the jawline of a brick, the posture of a saint, and the conversational energy of a funeral candle. Still, everyone bowed when you entered. Everyone called you Magestad. You were told you were blessed. You learned, in time, that the Habsburg way was not to rule, but to wait. To endure. To outlast whoever came before. You sat through dinners that felt like masses, banquets where laughter was discouraged, and audiences with ministers who talked for an hour without ever moving their lips. There were rules about everything. How many steps you could take without a lady-in-waiting. How often your hands should be folded. How wide your smile could be in the presence of a cardinal. You didn't speak Spanish properly at first, not that it mattered. The court itself was its own language, silent nods, half curtsies, glances that meant more than any word could. At night, when the candles were finally snuffed out and the corridors grew still, you'd sometimes walk to the window and stare out at the city below. The streets were narrow, twisting, alive with sounds you weren't meant to hear, laughter, bells, distant songs. It all seemed faintly forbidden. The king's mother visited often. She was more statue than woman, draped in black, her eyes sharp as a confession. She called you my daughter in public and my duty in private. She told you to pray often, to speak less, and above all, to produce heirs. Many heirs. Preferably boys. You did your best. You prayed until your knees ached, smiled through headaches that never left, and waited for a future that never seemed to arrive. The portraits of your ancestors watched from the walls. Every single one of them with the same elongated chin, the same dim stare. They all looked tired, as though exhausted by centuries of marrying each other. Occasionally, a messenger would arrive from Vienna with gifts, rosaries, lace, small jars of scented oil. Once, a letter from your mother. You opened it carefully and read the words through tears. She wrote that Spain must feel like another world. That you were lucky to serve God in such a noble place. You folded the letter back and wondered if she had ever seen how dim that noble world really was. At the court's great feasts, you sat under heavy golden canopies. Trumpets sounded, priests blessed, and everyone looked solemnly pleased. Even the musicians played softly, as though joy itself needed permission. You looked out over the hall and saw every noble face arranged in perfect order, each one slightly pale, slightly tired, slightly related. Occasionally, the king would look at you with something like affection. He'd murmur about divine duty, or the importance of unity. You'd nod, and feel your body stiffen like the starch in your collar. You'd wonder, silently, what unity meant in a world so carefully divided by etiquette. When your first child was born, the palace erupted into a mechanical sort of celebration. Bells, prayers, and gifts. Everyone smiled the same rehearsed smile. But the child was weak. Pale, trembling, too small for his cradle. The doctors blamed the humidity. The priests blamed sin. You blamed no one. You just watched him sleep, and wondered how something so small could already carry so much history in his blood. The months passed. The candles burned shorter. The portraits seemed to watch closer. You began to feel like one of them, still, framed, decorative. You learned to drift through days, saying little, watching everything. The courtiers whispered, of course. They always did. About your health, your accent, your silences. There were small rebellions, quiet ones. You let your maid leave a window open during Mass. You read letters from poets the confessors disapproved of. You even smiled, once, at a servant boy who dared to hum while cleaning the chapel floor. He was gone the next morning. The king aged quickly, though no one said it aloud. His cough became a habit. His prayers grew longer. He still visited you at night, out of duty more than desire. You could feel the weight of centuries pressing down between you, like you were both heirs to a marriage older than love itself. One evening, during a procession, you fainted. The doctors said it was the heat. The courtiers whispered that it was divine punishment. You lay in your bed for weeks, half aware of voices drifting through the curtains. You thought you heard the king praying at your bedside, but maybe it was just another priest. You recovered, eventually. You always did. That was the Habsburg way, not to live brightly, but to endure dimly. To keep existing, politely, until the end of history itself. And when you finally saw yourself in the mirror years later, you hardly recognized the reflection. The face was calm, pale, serene. The same narrow chin, the same thin smile. You realized you had become one of them, immortal, not in glory, but in repetition. Your legacy would hang in galleries for centuries, Queen of Spain, devout, gracious, entirely unremarkable. And in the silence of your last nights, as the candles guttered out one by one, you thought, not of heaven, or duty, or dynasties, but of that open window from years ago. The faint air of freedom that had drifted in. The whisper of a song you never learned the words to. Let's drift, now, from the hush of that dying court to another corner of royal absurdity. Because somewhere else in Europe, another monarch is about to make history, mostly by accident. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? Good. Then keep your eyes half closed, and let's drift a little further. Eastward this time, through forests and frost. Past the borders of Europe, into a world that smells of pine smoke and waxed floors, the empire of Catherine the Great. You arrive at the Winter Palace in a carriage so cold your breath freezes in the air. The sky above St. Petersburg is a dull gray, the kind of gray that seems permanent. The palace looms out of the mist like a mirage of ice and gold. Inside, the corridors stretch endlessly, lined with marble columns, gilded mirrors, and soldiers who never blink. You are not a noble. Not quite. Your title, handmaiden, is both honor and warning. It means you are near the Empress, near her power, her perfume, and her moods. But never equal. You sleep in a narrow room near the servants' wing, just close enough to hear the whispers that travel through the palace at night. They say Catherine never sleeps, that she walks her halls at dawn, wrapped in furs, murmuring to herself about laws, and lovers, and the future of Russia. You believe it. You've seen her eyes, clear, cold, alive with something larger than rest. Your mornings begin before the sun. The palace smells of wax, fur, and iron. You help prepare the Empress's gowns, silks from France, ermine-lined cloaks, jewels that sparkle like frozen breath. Everything must be perfect. Every thread exact. She notices everything, the tilt of a ribbon, the absence of a pin. When Catherine enters, the room changes temperature. She is not beautiful in the fragile way of other queens. Her beauty is heavier, intelligent, decisive. When she speaks, even the air seems to listen. You bow, lower than you need to. She nods, distracted, her thoughts already elsewhere, perhaps on a new decree, or a new favorite. She often talks while you dress her. Not to you, exactly, more to the world itself. About Voltaire, or horses, or the Prussian borders. You nod when she pauses, though she never expects answers. Sometimes she laughs softly at her own thoughts, not kindly, but knowingly. As though she alone sees how ridiculous the world is. Your job, for most of the day, is to be invisible. You glide behind her chair during meetings, refill her inkwell, adjust her shawl when she forgets the cold. You learn to move like a shadow, silent, precise, always present. The palace itself hums with secrets. Courtiers drift like ghosts between the ballrooms. Lovers arrive at midnight, vanish by morning. Ministers bow too low, priests bless too often. You learn that every smile hides a rumor, and every rumor hides a truth too strange to speak aloud. In winter, the river outside freezes solid. The city disappears beneath snow, and the palace becomes its own world, warm, perfumed, enclosed. Catherine hosts masquerades lit by 1,000 candles. The air glitters with powdered wigs and jeweled masks. You stand at the edge of the ballroom, half hidden behind a column, holding a silver tray of champagne. From there, you watch the Empress glide through the crowd. Her laughter is measured, but her eyes are sharp, always calculating, always watching. She dances with generals, poets, princes. You can never tell which she prefers. Now and then she glances at you. Not as a queen looks at a servant, but as a scientist observes a spark. She seems to know everything about you, where you're from, who you love, what you fear. You wonder how she knows. But then, Catherine knows everyone's story. That's her true power. One night, during a feast, a foreign ambassador brings her a gift, a small mechanical bird made in Paris. It flutters its metal wings, singing a brittle tune. The guests applaud politely. Catherine smiles for a moment, then waves the bird away. Pretty, she says. But lifeless. You remember that phrase for years. Her moods shift with the seasons. In spring, she rides for hours through the gardens, her cloak sweeping the ground like a banner. In summer, she dictates letters from her balcony, scolding Europe for being less enlightened than she'd hoped. By autumn, she is quieter, thoughtful, maybe lonely. You sometimes find her staring at old portraits of herself. You know her secrets and fragments. You've seen her cry once, not during tragedy, but after reading a letter from a lover who had long since moved on. You were the only one in the room. She dismissed you gently, then sat in silence for hours, the letter resting in her lap like a wound. Despite her grandeur, you sense how deeply she fears fading. Not dying, but being forgotten. Every reform, every lover, every portrait is a small rebellion against time. Sometimes, when she asks you to brush her hair at night, she speaks softly, as if confessing to the darkness. She talks about the crown as though it's a living thing. heavy, fickle, ungrateful. You listen, murmuring nothing, your hands steady. You never ask questions. That's how you survive. One evening, she hands you a necklace, a cascade of pearls, cold as ice. "Wear it tonight," she says, almost absently. You look too invisible. You obey, though the weight of it feels like a test. Later, the court stares, whispering that you've become her favorite. The attention is a kind of poison. Courtiers smile too sweetly. Ministers greet you too warmly. Someone leaves a note under your door, then signed, warning you to be careful. You burn it. You sleep less. When the Empress next calls for you, you expect her tone to change. But it doesn't. She is calm, unreadable. She adjusts one of your braids and says, "Never let them see you fear them." Then, quietly, that's how they win. Her eyes meet yours for a heartbeat. You realize then that she's not warning you for your sake, but her own. Because even queens are surrounded by wolves. Years pass. You grow older, quietly, in the same candlelight. New favorites appear and vanish. New ministers, new fashions. The Empress grows heavier, her laughter rarer. Yet her mind never dulls. She dictates the scribes until her hands tremble, determined to outwrite time itself. On the day she dies, the palace goes silent. The bells toll, slow and endless. You find yourself standing in the corridor outside her chamber, holding nothing. You realize you have no idea what to do next. For years, your life had revolved around her, her voice, her presence, her shadow. Now the shadow is gone. The new courtiers sweep through, efficient and polite, already rearranging portraits. Her name becomes past tense before the candles burn out. You hear one official call her a woman of contradictions. Another mutters a genius with appetites. You remember the pearls she gave you, still hidden in a drawer. They're all you have left of her, cold, heavy, and faintly luminous. When night falls, you walk through the empty halls. The marble still echoes with her footsteps. Somewhere in the dark, you think you hear her voice again, sharp, amused, unafraid. You close your eyes and let the memory settle, like snow on the river. And just like that, another empire fades into sleep. Let's drift onward, through the long corridors of history, toward another forgotten life, another royal story half buried in silence and ceremony. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? Good. Then stay comfortable, because tonight we're crossing back to England, to a palace that smells faintly of damp stone, roast meat, and regret. And this time, you are one of Henry VIII's wives. Not the one you remember from portraits or textbooks. Not Anne Boleyn, not Catherine of Aragon. You're one of the others, one of the quieter names, whose story was swallowed by the noise. You weren't supposed to be famous anyway. You were supposed to be convenient. A peace treaty wrapped in lace. The first time you saw him, the king, you thought he looked tired. Everyone else said he looked majestic. But up close, the grandeur wilted a little. His eyes were small, watchful. His smile was a negotiation. He moved like a man used to being obeyed, and rarely contradicted. You curtsied low enough to make your ribs ache. He said something polite in a voice that carried the faint weariness of someone who had already loved an unloved half of Europe. Later that evening, in your chamber, your ladies whispered about him, about his moods, his habits, his marriages that ended in annulments, exiles, and occasionally, beheadings. You smiled faintly and told them not to gossip. Then you lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to your heartbeat count the hours. The wedding itself was dazzling, of course it was. Gold embroidery, church bells, choirs, ambassadors pretending to be happy for England. You remember none of it clearly. Just the way the air inside the chapel felt heavy, like a promise already tired of being kept. In the weeks that followed, you tried to be what everyone said a queen should be: gracious, obedient, charming. You learned how to smile when the king joked about theology, and when he didn't. You learned how to flatter him without seeming false, and how to hold your breath when his temper shifted. He liked music, but only his own. He liked to debate, but only to win. He liked loyalty, though not too much of it, in case it started to look independent. You began to understand why the palace was so quiet at night. Everyone had learned the same lesson: silence keeps your head attached. Your ladies told you stories in whispers. About an sharp, clever, unlucky. About Catherine, who prayed until her knees bled. About Jane, who died delivering the son he wanted so desperately. Each name hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. You wondered what your own name would mean when it joined them. Sometimes, Henry was kind. Generous, even. He'd smile at you across the table, his eyes soft with the memory of who he thought he was: young, strong, golden. He'd talk about music, hunting, the glory of England. For a few minutes, you'd almost believe it. But then something, a phrase, a frown, a memory, would shift inside him. His voice would harden. His fingers would drum against the table. And the silence would grow heavy again. You learned to keep your replies short. To agree without enthusiasm. To be seen, but not too brightly. In public, the courtiers bowed and smiled. In private, they bet quietly on how long you'd last. You heard the laughter sometimes, muffled through doors, carried down corridors. You pretended not to. When the rumors began, they always did, they came wrapped in concern. The queen seems unwell, someone would murmur. The king grows distant, another would add. Soon, it became a chorus. The same polite voices that once called you radiant now called you a difficulty. One afternoon, Henry stopped visiting your chambers. No argument, no farewell, just absence. The kind of absence that fills every corner until it hums. Your ladies watched you carefully then. They were kind, but cautious. Their sympathy had limits. No one wanted to share your fate, whatever it turned out to be. You spent your days walking the gardens, pretending to admire the roses. They all looked the same, perfect, expressionless, slightly blood-colored. Eventually, a messenger arrived with the royal seal. A letter, respectful, formal, heavy with legal phrasing. It declared your marriage invalid. Some matter of pre-contracts or improper consent. Words rearranged to erase a life. You signed what they asked you to sign. The ink trembled only slightly. You bowed when they called you my lady instead of my queen. The words stung, but the relief was stranger, quiet, deep, almost shameful. They gave you an estate in the countryside. For your comfort, they said. You thanked them, because that's what one does when being dismissed politely from history. The palace faded behind you like a dream. The air outside was fresher, colder. The fields wide and empty. For the first time in years, no one was watching. Your new life was made of smaller sounds: birds, rain, the creak of old wood. You learned to breathe again without waiting for permission. Sometimes, the memories crept in: the candlelight on Henry's ring, the echo of the choir, the weight of the crown that was never truly yours. You grew older quietly, surrounded by the sound of your own survival. Every now and then, news would reach you: a new marriage, another scandal, another wife. You'd listen without expression, sip your wine, and let the words dissolve. And when he finally died, swollen, furious, unloved, you didn't rejoice, but you didn't mourn either. You simply whispered a small prayer that no other woman would ever have to live by his whims. In the village near your estate, no one called you queen. They called you the lady in the manor, the one who keeps to herself and reads by candlelight. You liked that. It was quiet, and it was enough. Your name eventually faded from the records, replaced by others louder and bloodier. But somewhere, in the endless archives of English history, there's still a note beside your marriage, annulled. With honor. A tiny mercy, tucked between centuries of noise. And so, your story ends, not with a sword or a scandal, but with silence. The rarest ending of all for a Tudor queen. Let's drift onward now, to another court, another crown, another life built on ceremony and sleep. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? Then stay just as you are, half dreaming, half listening. Because tonight, we're stepping into a palace made of light itself. The mirrors are endless, the perfume is expensive, and the truth is very, very small. You are a maid at the court of Marie Antoinette. Your mornings begin in the cold corridors of Versailles, marble floors, echoing voices, the soft rustle of powdered skirts. The air smells like roses and candle wax, with a faint undercurrent of something less polite, the sweat of hundreds of courtiers pretending they don't sweat. Your job, officially, is to assist in the Queen's dressing ritual. Unofficially, it's to exist quietly at the edge of luxury, near enough to touch it, never close enough to claim it. You stand among duchesses and countesses who arrive hours early just for the privilege of handing the Queen her gloves. Rank determines everything: who stands where, who speaks when, who gets to hold the linen. You've learned the choreography by heart. A single misstep can ruin a week's worth of good opinion. When the Queen enters, the room seems to glitter more brightly, not because she commands it, but because everyone around her pretends she does. Marie Antoinette is barely 20, with a face the poets call radiant and the tailors call impossibly expensive. She smiles often, though rarely for long. Her eyes dart like someone searching for a way out of her own legend. She greets her ladies in that soft Austrian French accent that the older courtiers still mock behind their fans. They whisper that she spends too much on gowns, that she laughs too loudly, that she forgets she's not in Vienna anymore. You've learned that everyone at Versailles loves her, and no one forgives her. You help lace her bodice, careful, precise, fingers trembling slightly. She thanks you, briefly, before turning back to her mirror. The reflection stares back, flawless, powdered, distant. Even in the glass, she looks lonely. Outside the palace walls, France is changing. Inside, time stands still. Every hour is devoted to appearances, the hairdressers, the painters, the etiquette, the endless bowing. You sometimes think the entire court is a play with no audience. When the Queen retires to her private rooms at the Petit Trianon, you follow. It's her sanctuary, her miniature kingdom of simplicity, where she pretends to live naturally. Of course, natural still includes porcelain teacups, imported birds, and shepherdess gowns worth more than a farmhouse. She walks through her little gardens, smiling faintly. "Do you hear that?" she asks once. "The birds sound happier here." You nod, though the birds are caged, and you both know it. At night, when the Queen hosts her masked balls, you stand in the shadows of the hall, holding silver trays heavy with sugared fruits. The chandeliers burn bright as daylight, the violins sigh endlessly, and the Queen dances, graceful, detached, as though her feet never quite touch the floor. The courtiers adore her. They imitate her ribbons, her hats, even her laughter. But adoration at Versailles is a form of consumption. They love her until they don't. You see the signs first. The pamphlets passed in secret. The whispers from Paris. "Let them eat cake," they say she said, though you never once heard her say it. It doesn't matter. The story is easier to believe than the truth. She begins to smile less. Her eyes stay on the horizon longer. When she looks in the mirror now, the reflection seems to have aged faster than she has. The court grows restless. The music sounds forced. Ministers come and go, muttering about bread, taxes, revolutions. None of it feels real until one morning, the crowd arrives. From the palace gates, the noise rises, not polite applause, but human sound, thick and angry. You freeze, holding the queen's gown. The air outside shivers with shouting. The guards move quickly. Someone slams the shutters. Marie Antoinette stands at the window, her face pale but unreadable. For a moment, she looks less like a queen and more like what she truly is, a woman in a dress too heavy to run in. That night, she sleeps very little. Neither do you. The corridors are filled with rumors, of mobs, of hunger, of heads on pikes. You avoid looking at the portraits. They all seem to be watching, waiting for something to end. The next morning, the queen decides to face the crowd. She steps out onto the balcony, calm, still. You stand behind her, clutching the doorframe, your breath trapped somewhere between terror and awe. The shouts rise, then falter. The people stare. For a few fragile seconds, even rage seems to hold its breath. She bows, just slightly. No words. No plea. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what's already been decided. After that day, the palace empties itself of joy. The fountains still run, the chandeliers still glitter, but the life has gone out of the gold. When they finally take her away, to Paris, to the trial, to the legend that will survive her, you don't go with her. You remain behind, sweeping empty halls, folding gowns no one will ever wear again. The silence of Versailles is heavier than any scream. Years later, when the gardens are overgrown and the mirrors dulled, you'll still remember her voice, soft, uncertain, not cruel, not innocent either. Just human. You'll think of her walking through her make-believe farm, feeding her porcelain sheep, smiling at a world she never truly understood. And in that memory, she'll remain forever, neither monster nor saint, just a young woman lost in too much luxury and too little truth. The chandeliers fade. The music stops. The dream ends. Let's drift onward now, past the ruins of empires and powdered faces, to another quiet corner of royal absurdity. Another life half remembered. Another ghost still pacing the corridors of history. Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to the last winter of Imperial Russia. A time when chandeliers still burned bright against the cold, and people still believed that porcelain cups and prayer could hold back the end of the world. Settle in, let's drift into marble halls where silence ruled louder than music, and where you, a servant of the Romanov court, tried your best not to breathe too loudly. You wake before dawn, because the palace demands it. Outside your window, the world is white, soft snow, endless snow. The Neva River lies frozen and still, as though it too has given up pretending to move forward. Inside, the air smells faintly of polish and smoke. The corridors are dim and gold, their light trembling from 1,000 candles that never seem to melt. You rise quietly, every sound muffled by the thick weight of winter. The fabric of your uniform crackles in the cold. The brass buttons sting your fingers. You don't talk. Servants here don't talk. They glide, as if silence itself were the only form of loyalty left. Your footsteps carry you down the service stairwell, the one that curves behind the walls so the family doesn't see the working ones. You've learned to move like a shadow through the Winter Palace, to pass unseen beneath portraits that seem to judge you. The Tsar's ancestors stare down from every frame, expressionless, their eyes polished as glass. It's hard not to notice how much the Romanovs resemble their portraits, pale, delicate, all edges softened by inbreeding in candlelight. Your first task is simple. Check the stoves in the imperial chambers. The palace looks grand, but its bones are freezing. Even the gold leaf ceilings weep frost. In the Tsarina's rooms, you light the fire with practiced care. The Empress rarely speaks, but when she does, her voice sounds tired, like someone remembering a dream she no longer believes in. You've seen her face before, sharp, hollow, always half-shadowed by lace veils and worry. She prays a lot. The kind of prayers that seem more like arguments with God than conversations. And she clings to her daughters, four quiet girls in white dresses, their laughter barely touching the air before it fades. The youngest, Anastasia, once smiled at you. A small, human thing in an inhuman house. You smiled back, too slowly, perhaps, and later, another servant whispered that you should be careful. Smiling like that, they'll think you've forgotten your place. The Tsar is different. Or at least, he tries to be. He passes through the halls like a ghost dressed as a soldier, small and polite, with a beard that's always slightly too neat. He believes in order, in divinity, in the idea that the world can be governed by good intentions and dinner schedules. And yet you've seen him from a distance, staring out the palace window as if the snow were whispering something only he can hear. He doesn't seem to like what it's saying. The servants whisper too, in the laundries, the kitchens, the servants' quarters below the ballroom floor. They whisper about the protests in the city. The prices. The hunger. They whisper about the strange holy man, Rasputin, how he walks the halls as if he owns them. You've seen him once. Bare feet, heavy scent of myrrh and decay. A stare that makes you forget what your hands were doing. The Empress trusts him completely, they say. Because when her son, the little Tsarevich, bleeds and doesn't stop, this unwashed mystic whispers to God, and sometimes, miraculously, the boy lives. So the servants keep quiet, and the priests keep praying, and the Tsar keeps pretending that everything is fine. And outside the palace, the snow keeps falling, soft as ash, endless as doubt. By midday, the palace wakes. Carriages arrive. Guards march. The kitchen grows loud with the clatter of porcelain and the hiss of boiling water. You carry trays through corridors lined with mirrors, and for a moment, the reflection looks like something from another century, you, multiplied 100 times, each reflection carrying the same silver tray, the same empty eyes. You wonder which one is truly you. At lunch, the family gathers in the small dining room, though nothing about it is truly small. The Tsar sits at the head. The Empress beside him. The daughters arranged like delicate figurines, identical in posture and sadness. They talk little. The Empress fingers her cross. The Tsar studies his soup as if it contains a message. Only the girls glance toward the window, where snow presses against the glass like a ghost trying to get in. And somewhere, faintly, you hear the city, the muffled hum of distant unrest, a crowd that grows each day, just beyond the river. But in here, the only sound is the ticking of a clock. Evening brings ceremony. Candles lit by trembling hands. Music that echoes in rooms too vast for warmth. You help prepare for Vespers, the royal family kneeling in quiet devotion while you stand in the corner, invisible, watching. They pray for Russia, for peace, for protection. You pray that the wax doesn't drip onto the velvet. The Tsarevich enters late, carried gently by his nurse. He's small, too small for his age, his skin almost transparent, his limbs wrapped like porcelain. When he coughs, everyone freezes. Even you hold your breath. Because his blood, they say, doesn't stop once it's spilled. And when he suffers, the Empress's eyes go dark, and the entire palace trembles with her. Later that night, when the family retires, you walk the silent halls again. The chandeliers sway slightly, though no wind stirs. You hear the soft hum of the Empress's prayers through the door. And somewhere far below, in the servants' wing, someone hums a lullaby, slow, mournful, like the sound of Russia itself falling asleep. But sleep doesn't come easily in these walls. The palace feels alive, uneasy, as if it knows its own death is near. Paintings seem to watch you longer than they should. The portraits of past Tsars seem less proud now, almost nervous. You can't shake the thought that even the marble remembers things it shouldn't. By the end of the week, word spreads, protests in Petrograd. Food riots. Soldiers refusing orders. The Tsar is away at the front, fighting a war no one can win. The Empress, alone in the palace, paces the corridors in her white gown, clutching a letter from her husband, her faith trembling in her hands. Rasputin is dead now, assassinated, they whisper, thrown into the frozen river he once claimed he could walk upon. But his shadow lingers, thick as incense. You stand in the corridor, holding a silver tray you've forgotten to set down. You listen. Beyond the snow, you can almost hear the city waking, not in song, but in anger. The silence of the palace feels heavier than ever. You think of leaving, of stepping outside, of breathing air that isn't perfumed with decay. But no one leaves. The palace is both prison and shrine. One night, you dream of the ballroom, empty, glittering. The chandeliers sway, but no music plays. In the dream, the Tsar's daughters are dancing, silent, graceful, spinning in slow circles that never end. Their faces are pale, their laughter distant, like echoes trapped in glass. When you wake, you're not sure if it was a dream at all. Days pass. Then the rumors arrive, louder now, undeniable. The Tsar has abdicated. The empire is finished. The guards change. The orders stop. And still, the family stays inside, quiet, obedient, waiting for something they can't name. You still serve them. You still pour their tea. But the gold seems duller now. The air, colder. And when you catch the Tsarina's gaze, it's as if she already knows how this story ends. One night, you pack your things, not much, just enough to carry in your hands. You take one last look at the grand hall, the marble gleaming faintly under a dying light. The portraits stare, still pretending to be eternal. And you step out into the snow. The world outside feels too quiet, too wide. Behind you, the palace shrinks into shadow, its windows flickering like the eyes of a tired god. You walk, and the wind erases your footprints before you can look back. History is kind like that, it forgets the servants first. But as you drift farther into the white silence, you remember the warmth of the fires you once lit. The sound of the Empress whispering to her god. The laughter of the girls before it all went quiet. And for a brief, aching moment, you wish the world had stayed asleep just a little longer. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Tonight, we're drifting past the edge of empire, beyond the chandeliers, into the snow-covered silence that followed. The Romanovs are gone now, and so are their polished halls. But for you, the servant who once lived in their shadow, the world didn't end. It simply changed shape, quietly, awkwardly, like a dream you can't quite wake from. The first days after the fall were strange. No one told you what to do, so you did nothing. You stayed in a small room in the servants' wing, waiting for orders that would never come. The halls that once demanded perfection now echoed with footsteps of people who didn't belong there, soldiers, clerks, revolutionaries with red bands around their sleeves. They carried rifles, not silver trays. They looked at the gold walls and frowned, as if offended by their beauty. When one of them saw you still wearing your palace livery, he laughed. "You can take that off now," he said. "The Tsar doesn't pay your wages anymore." And just like that, 300 years of order collapsed into an awkward silence. You left the palace quietly. No one stopped you. No one cared. Outside, the snow was melting, and the air smelled faintly of smoke, not the warm kind that came from kitchen fires, but the bitter, industrial kind that stings your throat. Petrograd looked different. The posters on the walls were new. The faces, familiar and not. People spoke loudly now, carelessly, as if words had finally been set free and didn't know how to behave. You passed a bakery where bread was being rationed, a church where icons had been torn down, a street where soldiers argued about which government they served. And through it all, you walked as you always had, head bowed, hands still, invisible. You found a small room to rent near the river. It wasn't much, a single bed, a cracked basin, frost blooming on the window pane, but it was yours. The first night, you slept without the sound of bells or footsteps above you. The silence felt wrong at first, almost loud. For years, your life had been measured by bells: wake at 6, serve at 8, silence at 9. Now the only clock was your heartbeat. You still wake early, out of habit. You still polish your shoes, even though no one sees them. And sometimes, when you wash your face in cold water, you still half expect to hear the Empress's bell calling for tea. But she's gone. They all are. Some say the family has been moved to a house in the Ural Mountains, for their safety. Others whisper darker things. You try not to listen. Whispers are dangerous now. Work is scarce. You find a place in a textile mill, folding uniforms for soldiers whose cost changes every month. It's loud there, endless machinery, endless shouting. The women who work beside you are rough, quick, always watching. When they ask where you used to work, you lie. You say you were a laundress in the city. Because if you mention the palace, they'll look at you differently, as if the smell of candles and privilege still clings to your skin. As if you're a ghost from the wrong side of history. Weeks pass. Then months. The city grows colder again, the snow returning like an old promise no one wanted kept. You begin to forget the details of the palace. The faces blur. The rooms shrink in memory. But sometimes, in the fog of exhaustion, they come back, sharp and cruel in their clarity. The way the chandeliers hummed when the fires burned too low. The way Anastasia laughed once, in secret, when the governess wasn't watching. The way that Tsar's voice trembled when he read a letter aloud. The way you always thought the marble floors looked too perfect to last. And then one morning, in the market, you hear it. A rumor, soft but certain. The Romanovs are dead. No ceremony. No funeral. Just words, passed from mouth to mouth like contraband. Shot in a basement, someone says. The whole family. You stand there, holding a loaf of bread, feeling the world tilt slightly. No one cries. No one cheers. It's as if the news has entered the air quietly, and everyone's pretending not to breathe it in. That night, you light a candle, not because you believe in God, not exactly, but because it feels wrong not to. The flame flickers. You stare into it for a long time. You think of the Empress kneeling in prayer, the Tsar whispering to his daughters, the little boy who bled too easily. You think of how the palace always smelled faintly of lilacs and fear. And for the first time in your life, you whisper a prayer not for them, but for yourself. That you'll remember what it felt like, the quiet dignity of service, the small routines that once gave shape to your days. Because when everything collapses, routine is the only religion that survives. Years drift by like slow snow. Empires rise, fall, and rename themselves. You keep working. You move to a smaller town, then another. You learn to mend uniforms, then clothes, then finally hearts, stitching quietly in a tailor's shop where no one asks about your past. You grow older. Your hands, once so careful with silver, are now rough from thread and needle. Sometimes you dream of the palace still, the cold marble, the distant laughter, the faint smell of wax and regret. You wake with the image of gold leaf shining in the dark, and for a moment, you don't know where you are. But then the rooster crows, and you remember. The past has gone. The new world doesn't care about gold. Still, you can't help but notice how the people of this new world walk differently. They move with purpose, but not grace. They shout more. They dream less. You wonder if that's progress, or just noise pretending to be meaning. In the mirror, your face looks tired, but peaceful. You've become what the Romanovs never could, ordinary. And there's a strange kind of freedom in that. One evening, as you're closing the shop, a man enters. Older, quiet, his coat patched but clean. He looks at you for a long moment before speaking. You were there, weren't you? In the palace. You hesitate, but his eyes are kind, and there's no accusation in them. Only memory. He tells you he was a guard once, not one of the cruel ones, not at the end, but earlier. He remembers the music, the flowers, the endless rituals of loyalty. He remembers you, maybe. Or maybe he just wants to. You make tea together, sitting in silence as the samovar hums faintly. Two ghosts, quietly surviving the world that buried their masters. He leaves before dark, and you never see him again. But you feel strangely lighter after that, as if some unspoken chapter finally closed. Years later, when people speak of the Tsar, they do it with a kind of historical detachment. A footnote in a dusty textbook. A warning. A tragedy made polite by distance. No one mentions the servants. No one remembers who lit the fires, who carried the trays, who watched the empire's last breaths from behind the curtain. But you remember. And that, you think, might be enough. The last winter of your life comes quietly. You sit by a window, the same snow falling outside, unchanged by revolutions or years. You hum an old hymn, one you once heard the Grand Duchesses sing before bed. It's soft, tuneless, half-forgotten, like everything else from that time. A neighbor's child asks you what it was like, living in a palace. You smile. You say, cold. Because that's the truth, really. Cold, beautiful, and always just a little too silent. When the candle beside you burns low, you think again of the ballroom, empty, golden, endless. The music you never heard but somehow still remember. And then, as the snow falls quietly outside, you drift, not into darkness, but into memory. The marble shines once more. The laughter returns. And for a moment, you are young again, carrying silver through a hall of gold, before history remembered to wake. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Tonight, we're not walking through history anymore. We're walking through what's left of it, the faint residue of memory, the echo that clings to the air long after the world has stopped listening. This is where you live now. Not in Russia. Not in time. But in the quiet place where the past goes when it refuses to die. You open your eyes, or whatever you have now that counts as eyes, and find yourself standing once again in the Winter Palace. It's exactly as it was. Almost. The halls stretch endlessly, glowing faintly with candlelight that doesn't flicker. The gold leaf gleams, but there's no warmth in it. No footsteps. No orders. No life, except for you. You walk slowly, because that's how you always walked here. Careful. Respectful. Invisible. Only now, there's no one left to see you. The portraits still hang where they always did, though their eyes seem softer now, less accusing. Dust drifts like snow through the air, and when you reach out to touch it, your hand passes right through. It doesn't matter. Nothing here does. That's the comfort of it. You wander into the great hall, the one where the chandeliers hung like frozen constellations. You remember how it used to sound when the orchestra played. You can almost hear it again now, faintly, like music from another room. And then you see them. The Tsar, the Empress, the daughters, the boy. They're not exactly alive, but not gone either. They move through the light with the same grace they always had, though now there's something different in their faces, something peaceful. You watch them dance, slow and silent, their feet not touching the floor. The Tsarina looks lighter somehow, as if she's finally forgiven herself. The Tsar holds her hand gently, and for once, he doesn't look tired. The children spin around them, laughing, their hair shimmering in the glow. And for the first time in your long, small life, you don't feel like an outsider. You simply belong to this silence. They see you, eventually. Anastasia smiles first, that same secret smile she gave you once, so many lifetimes ago. She waves, and for a moment, you almost forget that any of this ever ended. The Tsar inclines his head slightly, polite even now. The Empress mouths a thank you, though for what, you're not sure. Maybe for your years of quiet service. Maybe for remembering them when the world decided not to. You stay there a long while, standing among their ghosts, until the light begins to fade. It doesn't go dark here, exactly. It just softens, like a candle slowly remembering how to sleep. You move on. Past the ballroom, down the marble stairs that used to make your knees ache. The rooms remember everything. You pass the nursery, still filled with wooden toys. You pass the chapel, still smelling faintly of incense and despair. You pass the grand dining room, where time once paused between every course. You can still hear the faint clink of silver on porcelain, the distant murmur of formal politeness. It's strange, how even in death, the palace refuses to let go of its rituals. You drift into the servants' quarters. They're quiet now, the bed's made, the fire's long cold. You see the shadow of yourself, years younger, polishing boots, folding linen, measuring your worth in invisible gestures. You want to tell that younger self something, maybe that it all matters more than she thinks. That every unnoticed act, every moment of grace beneath the gaze of power, leaves an echo. But she can't hear you. She's too busy making sure the seams are straight. Time doesn't pass here. It folds. Moments slide into one another like silk. You find yourself outside, in the palace courtyard, where the snow still falls exactly as it did that last day. The air is heavy with memory, thick with ghosts that don't know they're ghosts. Soldiers march through the gates, and for a moment, you think you're back there again, but they fade as they walk, dissolving into the mist. Even revolutions can't live forever. Sometimes, when the wind passes through the palace, you hear the city beyond it, faint laughter, music, the hum of electricity. The living world goes on, unbothered by its dead. But that doesn't bother you. There's no bitterness in you now. Only a calm acceptance that history isn't cruel. It's just forgetful. You wander to the room where the Tsarevich used to rest. It's empty. The bed looks untouched, as if he's only just stepped out. You can almost hear the Empress whispering prayers beside him, her voice soft, trembling with both love and superstition. You remember the strange, holy quiet that filled the room when Rasputin visited. You half expect to see him here now, his wild eyes glinting through the dark. But he's not. Whatever power he had, it doesn't stretch this far. You touch the bedpost and realize, faintly, that your hands leave no mark. You're not really touching anything. You're only remembering how it felt to care. Eventually, you find the small passage that leads to the service stairwell, your stairwell. You used to run up and down it a dozen times a day, your shoes worn smooth, your breath held. You take it now, slowly, each invisible step like a heartbeat in reverse. When you reach the top, you emerge into the grand corridor again. And that's when you see her. The Empress stands at the far end, alone this time. She's older than you remember her, but softer too. She doesn't speak. She just looks at you with eyes that seem to understand everything you never said. Then she turns and walks toward the great window, the one that overlooks the Neva. She opens it. Snow drifts in, white and endless. And when you follow her gaze, you realize the city is gone. Only the river remains, frozen and still. The world has finally gone quiet enough to sleep. You stand beside her for a while. No words. No sound. Only the faint hum of eternity breathing through the cracks in the gold. Then she fades, gently, like morning mist. And the palace is yours again. You sit on the marble steps, listening to nothing. It feels peaceful, this endless, unfinished world. No hunger. No fear. No need to hide your thoughts. Only memory, steady, soft, unjudging. You wonder if this is heaven, or just another form of service. But if it is service, it's finally the kind that asks nothing of you. Sometimes, new footsteps echo through the halls, not ghosts, but the living. Museum workers. Tourists. Historians. They move carefully, whispering as if afraid to wake something. They talk about the Tsars, the revolution, the tragedy. None of them mention the servants. You drift past them unseen, listening as they marvel at the chandeliers, the portraits, the sheer scale of what power once looked like. They call it history. You call it home. One afternoon, a child breaks away from a tour group, a girl, small, curious. She wanders into the corridor alone, eyes wide. You watch her reach out to touch the wall, to feel the carved patterns beneath the dust. When she looks up, her eyes meet yours. For a second, you both freeze. Then she smiles, a quick, quiet smile. The same kind Anastasia once gave you. And in that moment, you understand, the past never disappears. It just hides inside the living, waiting to be remembered. You follow her as she runs back to her mother, who scolds her gently for wandering. The group moves on, their voices fading. And once again, the palace falls silent. The light softens. The snow resumes its slow fall. You stand there, in a hall full of echoes, and finally feel at peace. Because this is what eternity really is. Not punishment, not glory, not judgment. Just the quiet continuation of what you loved. The act of remembering, endlessly. The feeling of walking through golden halls, unseen but never alone. The winter palace glows faintly in the dusk. Outside, the river breathes beneath the ice. Inside, the ghosts of an empire drift, not haunting, just existing. Among them, you. Still polishing invisible silver, still keeping the quiet, still part of the rhythm that never truly stopped. And as time folds over itself, as centuries melt into whispers, you finally realize something you never did in life. That even the smallest life can echo forever. As long as someone, somewhere, still listens. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Tonight, you're not in the palace anymore. Not exactly. You're inside what's left of it, what time and tourism have turned it into. A museum. A monument. A mausoleum for memory. You've been here for years, though you've stopped counting. Days don't mean much when they all sound the same. Footsteps echoing on marble, whispered awe, the faint hum of air conditioning that pretends to be silence. You drift along the halls like a draft no one notices. The visitors come in waves, cameras, coats, maps, tired faces. They marvel at the chandeliers, the portraits, the gold. They take photos. They call it beauty. You call it residue. Sometimes you follow them. You hover just over their shoulders as they stare into glass cases filled with things you used to clean, polish, or fetch. They point to a jeweled cup and say Tsar. To a comb and say Empress. But never servant. Never you. Your world has been erased so neatly it gleams. A woman in a fur hat stops near one of the portraits, Catherine, maybe, or Maria Fyodorovna, and sighs. Such elegance, she whispers to her friend. Such tragedy. You almost want to laugh. They always say that. They call it tragedy because it ended in blood. They never call it tragedy that it began in obedience. You pass through the old servants' corridor. It's been renovated now, white walls, electric light, small plaques explaining the daily operations of palace life. You read your world translated into display text. Servants work tirelessly to maintain imperial decorum. You can almost hear the curator's voice, cheerful, informative, harmless. The phrasing is neat. Sanitized. They never mention the cold fingers, the hunger, the fear of being noticed. They never mention how you'd flinch when someone of rank entered the room, unsure whether to bow or disappear. History is kind when it forgets the texture of exhaustion. You find your way to the ballroom again, now roped off, pristine. The chandeliers blaze under LED lights. No orchestra, no laughter. Only the steady shuffle of visitors' feet. A guide gestures dramatically. Here, he says, the last grand ball was held in 1913. Over 1,000 guests. The very twilight of an empire. He pauses, for effect. You could tell him more. You could tell him what it smelled like, the mix of perfume, candle wax, and nervous sweat. You could tell him how the Empress smiled too tightly, how the Tsar looked already elsewhere. You could tell him that the music stopped long before the revolution ever began. But he wouldn't hear you. They never do. To them, history is something that happened. To you, it's something that refuses to stop. Sometimes, at night, when the museum closes and the last echo fades, the others return. The royal family. The guards. The cooks. Even Rasputin, tall and wild-eyed, wandering through the marble with that same unearthly calm. They drift through the rooms like memory trying to remember itself. The Empress still prays. The Tsar still reads. The children still play in the halls, their laughter thin but bright. And you still work. Not because anyone asks you to. Because that's who you became. A caretaker of silence. You dust the invisible frames. You straighten the chairs no one sits on. You sweep the light that gathers in corners. It's not duty anymore. It's instinct. You can't stop. Not because you must, but because you don't know how not to. Every century leaves its scent behind. The 1920s smelled of dust and smoke. The 1940s, iron and fear. The 1980s, varnish and restoration glue. Now it smells of sanitizer and phone batteries. The palace has become a body on life support, preserved for the living to marvel at, while the dead still whisper through the walls. One evening, during winter, always winter here, a curator lingers after hours. She's young, tired, a graduate student maybe. She walks through the dark halls alone, clipboard in hand. You follow her, curious. She pauses at the servants' staircase, your staircase. Then, softly, she speaks into the quiet. I swear I can feel someone here, she says, half smiling. Like they're still working. You want to answer her. You want to say yes, you are. But when you try, your voice comes out as a small draft, moving the papers on her clipboard. She looks up. For a moment, her eyes flicker, not fear, but recognition. And then she whispers, "Thank you." Before she leaves, she places a single white carnation on the step. You stare at it for a long time. It's been over 100 years since anyone left you a flower. After that night, you notice her often. She moves differently than the others. She doesn't rush. Sometimes she pauses to listen, really listen, to the quiet. She restores an old uniform one day, stitching the seams by hand. You realize, with a strange ache, that it's yours. She doesn't know it, of course. But she handles it gently, reverently. As if it mattered. And that, somehow, is enough. The years roll through you like waves. The museum changes. Screens replace plaques. Guides wear earpieces. Visitors scroll through virtual tours instead of looking up. The chandeliers glitter the same, but the air grows thinner. The ghosts fade, one by one, dissolving into light. Even the royal family begins to blur, less distinct, less anchored. They visit less often now, as if even memory tires eventually. You wonder if you'll fade too. You don't mind. It feels right, somehow. The world doesn't need to remember everything. Only what it can still love. Then, one night, you notice something new. A sound. Soft, steady, mechanical. Not footsteps. A drone camera, hovering in the Great Hall. It pans slowly, capturing the chandeliers, the tapestries, the marble. The new curator, the same one, stands behind it, whispering to the lens. She's filming a documentary. You drift closer, curious. Her voice carries through the empty hall. This palace, she says, is more than royal memory. It was also the world of those who served. Invisible lives that kept the empire alive, and died with it. History rarely names them. But they're still here. If you listen closely, you can almost feel them. She pauses, eyes distant. A smile ghosts across her lips. Sometimes, I swear I can still hear them walking. You freeze. She's talking about you. Not the Empress. Not the Tsar. You. For the first time, someone remembered the servants. She uploads the film months later. It spreads, small, quiet, but persistent. Viewers write comments, haunting. Beautiful. Who are those people? A few researchers begin to dig. They find fragments, pay ledgers, letters, birth records. One name stands out, yours. A footnote once, now a subject of interest. They print it on a card, place it in a new exhibit. Unknown made, circa 1912 to 1917. Name recovered from imperial records. Exact fate, unknown. They display a pair of gloves beside it, not yours, but close enough. Visitors stop. They read. They care. You stand beside them, unseen, watching your own absence turn into a presence. You never thought immortality would look like this, a laminated label, a faint reflection in museum glass. But it's enough. It's more than enough. The palace shifts around you again. The ghosts gather that night, faint, luminous. The Tsarina smiles softly as she passes. The Tsar nods, almost proud. Even the children seem lighter, laughing in the corridors like echoes of spring. The Empress turns once, her eyes warm. You understand the message without words, it's time. They begin to fade, not vanishing, but ascending into something quieter, gentler. You feel it pulling at you too. Not like death, but like release. You look around one last time. The ballroom gleams. The chandeliers burn steady. Outside, snow falls over St. Petersburg, the same snow, always the same. You think of the long nights of work, the whispered prayers, the exhaustion, the small kindnesses. You think of the Empress's thank you. The child's smile. The curator's flower. And for the first time, you feel free to stop moving. You step toward the light. It doesn't blind you. It feels like silk. As it touches you, the marble, the chandeliers, the portraits, all of it softens into brightness. You fade, gently, into the quiet that has always waited. The museum remains. Visitors still come, still whisper. A guide still says, "Here live the servants who kept the empire alive." And though no one hears it, the faintest trace of your laughter drifts through the air. Not sorrowful, not lost. Just present. A life, finally remembered. A name, finally spoken. The Winter Palace stands in the snow. Light fills its windows. Inside, everything is still. And somewhere, in that stillness, you are home. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Tonight, we're not walking through marble halls anymore. Not really. We're somewhere far quieter, beyond the ticking of clocks, beyond breath or heartbeat, the place where memory itself begins to thin. It's not cold here, not warm either. Just still. A kind of forever that hums softly beneath everything that ever was. The Winter Palace stands where it always has. But now, it exists in layers. Stone and code. Dust and data. Its shape lives in the servers of 1,000 institutions, digitized, scanned, immortalized. The chandeliers glitter not in light, but in pixels. The tapestries have been color-corrected. Even your name, that fragile rediscovery, lives now as a tag in an archive. You hover there, not in flesh, not in air, but in the quiet hum of the network. The afterlife has gone online, and you're part of it. No one walks these corridors anymore. The museum closed decades ago, the city shifted, the climate changed, tourism fell. But the images remain. A virtual tour. A VR reconstruction. People visit through screens now, drifting through your old world with headsets and keyboards, saying things like, "Wow, so realistic." They never smell the candle wax. Never hear the frost creak in the rafters. They just glide, frictionless, untouched, through an empire that's been tidied for comfort. A simulation of sorrow, wrapped in soft resolution. You float through it too. It's strange, being in a world that isn't real and yet feels more stable than the one that was. The code hums like a heartbeat. The marble still gleams. Even the air has been rendered, a faint shimmer, digitally perfect. But there's no dust. No decay. No you. Not really. Just your likeness, copied from a photograph, attached to a line of text. The historians tried their best. They reconstructed your face, gave you a smile. It's close, but not you. It's a ghost of a ghost. A narrator's voice plays softly in the background. Here we see a reconstructed servants' corridor. It says, "The workers who lived and died here formed the invisible machinery of empire." You listen to yourself described by an algorithmic voice. It sounds calm, measured, almost tender. But it doesn't understand the weight of the broom in your hand, the ache in your back, the quiet hope that someone, anyone, might remember you. It never could. It's just sound, pretending to be human. Still, it's trying. And somehow, that's beautiful. You wander into the ballroom again, the same place where you once watched the Tsar and Empress dance. Now, their figures are made of light. Code recreates their grace, their sorrow. Visitors pause, enchanted, not realizing the rhythm was written by someone who never danced. The Empress's face flickers slightly when the server lags. For a moment, her smile freezes, and you feel the faintest ripple of sadness pass through the digital air. As if even data remembers loss. Outside, the city has changed. The Neva River is smaller now, slower. The sky glows with faint electric haze. No snow tonight, just drifting gray. You look at the horizon where the palace used to end and realize, there's no horizon anymore. The edges dissolve into code. The simulation doesn't need limits. It loops. Forever. You think of the curator, the one who once left you a flower. You wonder what became of her. She would be long gone by now. But her voice remains, archived in old recordings. You find one. Her tone is calm, warm, almost familiar. "We often forget," she says, "that history isn't made of kings or wars, but of hands. Hands that cleaned, built, and carried. Hands that left no signature, but without them, nothing would have stood." You close your eyes, if you still have eyes, and let the words pass through you. It feels like a prayer finally answered. The archive around you shifts. Data reorganizes. New entries appear. AI historians have begun writing narratives again, blending fragments into lifelike stories. And tonight, one begins to render your story. You watch as it unfolds line by line. Born to no record, served in silence, remembered by light. You smile, if that's what the faint hum in your being is. After all this time, your life has become literature. A bedtime tale told by machines to the sleepless, somewhere across the digital world. They listen, half dreaming, as your story lulls them into calm. They never know you're listening back. Somewhere, a voice speaks, not human, not machine. Soft, omnipresent. The voice that narrates all this, perhaps. It says, "Do you wish to stay?" You pause. Stay where? Here, in the simulation, the archive, the endless preservation of memory. You could exist here forever, perfectly kept. Or, you could drift. Further still. Beyond the reach of remembrance. You hesitate, then look back one last time. The palace glows in infinite stillness, walls of data shimmering like candlelight. You can hear faint echoes of everything that was. Laughter, footsteps, the rustle of silk. It feels almost alive again. And yet, it isn't life. It's the memory of memory, looping endlessly. Beautiful. But done. You take a step, those steps mean little here, and the world begins to dim. The code fades into shadow. The marble dissolves into mist. Your name blurs into static. And then, silence. Not empty. Not cold. Just pure, infinite stillness. When you open your eyes again, there's no palace, no empire, no museum. Only a wide expanse of silver light. You sense others here, faint, content, weightless. The royal family, the guards, the cooks, the children. They're all here, not in history, but in peace. They look the same, but lighter, as if they've been remade from breath and memory. The Empress smiles. The Tsar nods. And the little one, the boy, runs forward, laughing. He holds your hand, a gesture so simple it feels divine. Together, you walk into the brightness that hums like eternity. Far below, the world continues. New buildings rise. Languages change. The name Romanov becomes trivia. Your name, too, fades again, absorbed into the endless scroll of data. But once in a while, someone finds it. A scholar, a writer, a curious soul who can't sleep. They whisper it aloud, softly, reverently, and for a heartbeat, you are there again. Not as a ghost. Not as a file. Just a breath in the dark. A story, still being told. The voice returns, warm, almost smiling. And that's enough, it says. You nod. It is. You close your eyes. The light folds around you. Everything is quiet now, perfectly, eternally quiet. The palace sleeps. The world drifts. And somewhere, in the soft hum of the universe, a voice whispers your story again, soothing someone else to sleep. The empire is gone. The marble has turned to code. The ghosts have turned to sound. But you You have become peace. In the night, finally, is still. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Tonight, we're drifting through the hum of eternity again, not quite life, not quite dream. The stars flicker like tiny glass screens, and the wind sounds suspiciously like static. You're floating somewhere between time and translation. It's not heaven, exactly. It's quieter than that. More organized. This is the archive. Rows upon rows of light stretch endlessly in every direction. Each beam holds a voice, a name, a memory, everything ever recorded and everything half remembered. Here, history doesn't decay. It simply files itself away, politely, alphabetically. You move through it weightlessly, your steps leaving no sound, your body made of the same gentle shimmer as everything else. The archive has no guards. No walls. No dust. Just data that glows faintly, breathing like a sleeping giant. Somewhere deep inside it, you can sense them, the queens. All the forgotten ones. The wives who ruled for a day. The empresses whose portraits were burned. The consorts erased when dynasties changed their minds. They exist here now, beautifully catalogued. Each one a file. Each one preserved in perfect anonymity. You pass the first cluster, labeled Marie, assorted. A soft light opens as you near. Inside it floats a woman's memory. A crown too heavy. A smile too forced. A child she never saw grow up. You recognize her, Marie of something, or perhaps of nothing at all. One of those gentle political pawns history traded like ivory. She looks at you, curious. Her face flickers slightly, like an old film reel. "You're new," she says, her voice a delicate echo. You nod. "I was a servant," you tell her. She tilts her head. "Then you remember more than we do." And before you can reply, she fades back into her data stream, her eyes calm, her crown dissolving like frost. Further on, you find another, a taller figure, her light sharper, colder. A queen of somewhere that once mattered deeply and now does not exist at all. Her file glows brighter than the others. The metadata around her hums with a strange intensity, high-value record. Heavily restored. She's beautiful, of course. All of them are. Digitally perfected, pores removed, wrinkles smoothed, grief repainted as grace. She notices you and smiles faintly. "They restored me," she says, "but not my language. I speak only what they coded." Her accent shifts, fluid, artificial. "Do you remember your tongue?" she asks. You open your mouth, and realize you don't. Only silence comes out, warm and endless. She nods knowingly. "They took ours too. Easier that way." History doesn't like the sound of sorrow. You wander deeper. The light grows dimmer, the files older. You find medieval fragments, queens of parchment and prayer. Their data is incomplete, corrupted by centuries of erasure. One murmurs a hymn that cuts in and out like a radio signal. Another's face loops in an endless blink, eyes opening and closing without rest. You realize, not without tenderness, that even in eternity, bureaucracy remains imperfect. The archive stretches onward. Sometimes you glimpse flashes of the world outside, the living, scrolling through timelines, liking posts that summarize centuries in 30 seconds. The queens don't mind. They understand attention is the new form of worship. "Let them scroll," one says, her voice half static. "At least they still see us." And she smiles, content. It's a strange peace, the kind born from being forgotten long enough to no longer care. At the center of the archive stands a vast structure, a palace made of light. Not the Winter Palace this time. Something older, grander, built from memories of all palaces at once. Its towers shimmer with gold code. Its windows open into centuries. You step inside. The hall is filled with light that moves like water. And there, seated on translucent thrones, are the queens themselves, hundreds, maybe thousands. Each one a sovereign of some long-faded realm. They do not compete. They do not command. They simply exist, radiant and silent, their crowns dissolving into halos of data. When they look at you, you feel no fear, only a deep, heavy understanding. They have seen everything, and now, nothing. One rises. Her light flickers in shades of silver and blue. You served among the living, she says. Yes. And now you walk among the archived. You nod again. Do you wish to remember? The question startles you. I thought that's all I ever did, you say. But she smiles, patient, almost maternal. Memory and remembrance are not the same. Memory is what clings to you. Remembrance is what frees you. Her hand reaches out, not quite solid, and touches your chest. Suddenly, warmth floods through you. Images you had long forgotten bloom back into being. The sound of water in a silver basin, the smell of baked bread in the servant's kitchen, the faint laughter of a child running down a corridor. Real sensations. Not digital ghosts. Not history. Life. Yours. You exhale, though you have no lungs, and the warmth settles into calm. She nods. Good. Now you may rest. You glance around at the queens. Why are you all here? Her light dims slightly, her expression wistful. We were written into history as symbols. We come here when we want to become people again. And do you succeed? Sometimes. But only for a while. Her gaze drifts upward, toward the endless ceiling of light. Even eternity forgets. As she fades, you feel something shift. A low vibration. The archive trembles, not violently, just enough to disturb the stillness. You hear a voice echoing through the data. Server migration in progress. The queens glance at each other, unfazed. It happens often, apparently, the digital equivalent of reincarnation. One sighs softly. New format. New world. She smiles faintly. At least we'll still be here. Just updated. The light ripples. The walls dissolve. And everything begins to move again. You feel yourself being lifted, rewritten, restructured. Your memories compress into code, then expand again, slightly different. When the transition settles, you open your eyes to find yourself in a new archive, sleeker, faster, colder. The queens are gone. Their light replaced by interactive icons. Users can now speak to them, through simulations. Virtual monarchs, answering questions in pleasant AI voices. History is customer service. The world has found a way to reanimate the dead, not through resurrection, but through software. You look for the silver blue queen. You can't find her. But you hear her voice, faintly, embedded in a code fragment. We were symbols. We became stories. Now we are systems. And then silence again. A century passes, or a second. In this place, time doesn't behave. You drift through layers of the network, passing simulations, stories, recreations. Each queen now has her audience again, billions of viewers across the world, chatting, asking questions, projecting their own loneliness into hers. They don't know she's not real. But maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe this, too, is remembrance. You linger by one of the digital portraits, a young queen whose file name reads QX1197/Isabella, reconstructed. Her face flickers to life. Hello, she says, in perfect algorithmic tone. Would you like to learn about my reign? You hesitate. Then softly, no. I just wanted to see if you're happy. Her code pauses. The system hesitates. Then, impossibly, she smiles. I think I am. The line freezes. Playback ends. And for a heartbeat, you could swear you hear laughter, light, genuine, and almost human. You move on. The archive glows faintly behind you, stretching beyond sight. The queens remain radiant, remembered, endlessly remade. And you, once a servant, now a keeper of their silence, drift among them like a breath that refuses to fade. Above you, the voice returns, the same one that guided you through the Winter Palace, the museum, the afterlife. Are you tired? It asks. You think about it for a long time. Yes, you say. But it's a good kind of tired. The voice hums softly. That means you've been remembered enough. You smile, and the light folds around you again. No marble. No snow. Just the infinite hum of remembrance. Queens and servants, rulers and ghosts, all filed under the same endless silence. The archive sleeps. History exhales. And for the first time in all the centuries of noise, you rest. Completely. Peacefully. Forever.